Hi, everyone, and welcome to the How to Sound Effects Show, where we talk about everything sounds, effects, and techniques for creating awesome sound design. Today, we have a very special guest on the show. He is a graduate of the Yale School of Drama. He's gone on to do various work for prestigious production companies and venues. He's done work for the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, the New Group, the Public Theater, Visceral Entertainment, and he's also done work on Broadway for various musicals such as Rocktopia, Groundhog Day, and Parisian Woman, amongst others. Lots of experience under his belt. And so welcome to the show, Ken Goodwin.
Hello, everybody.
All right. So actually, before I do that, I'm just going to put you on full screen here. There we go. So so what I normally like to do with guests once they're on the show is basically just tell us a bit about yourself, background, maybe a bit about education if you want, but basically how did you get into the industry and get to the position you are right now?
So I didn't really start in theater until high school, and that was by a total mistake. I showed up to the wrong bus stop and started talking to some kids because I had just moved to Allentown, Pennsylvania. And they got me all excited about stage crew, and then they were like, "Oh, what grade are you in?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to 8th grade." And they're like, "Oh, you're at the wrong bus stop, kid. So come see us next year." So, I started in, building scenery and operating the spotlight. And then when I came to apply to colleges, I went to the tiniest little school in the world in the middle of Pennsylvania. And I said I wanted to learn how to do sound. And they're like, "Great, you'll be the only sound person here." So took some radio classes, took some music classes, some music technology courses, and eventually became the one and only sound person in their department, and did every single show and did the battle of the bands at the local club, and had a great time. And then still figured that I wasn't qualified enough to go into the real world. So I went to grad school at Yale School of Drama and had a good time there, and honed my skills, and moved to New York City after that. And, along the way was doing opera and rock and roll, and went to the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina, which has like 11 different venues down there, and everything from circus and dance and ballet to opera and rock and roll kind of concerts. So, trying to diversify my skills as much as possible, but I still came back to theater, and I've been in New York City for the past 8 years, having a good time.
Awesome. That's so cool. So for people like myself, so I work in video games as a sound designer, but for others who are watching this, they'll probably be in a similar position. So for those who don't know, like, when you're hired on as a sound designer for a production, a show, let's say like even like a Broadway show, let's say we pick a Broadway show, like what's the process like? What happens? What do you do? What are your first steps when you meet with the director to come up with whatever sounds you might need for the show?
Usually it just goes into, hi, I'm a director. I'm looking for a sound designer. These are the dates. Are you available and interested? And this is kind of what the play is about. And I'll usually say, yeah. And they send me a script, and I'll read the script once or twice. And then we call them up, or we go out for coffee, and we get to have a really great conversation about just the world of the play or the musical that we're doing, and just really talk about the characters and developing, the background and their environment in which they live. So that's how it starts. And then once the director says, "Yes, you're a great match for me and for my team of people that I'm trying to build," then we go into the nitty-gritty details of contract negotiations and going to the venue, and we'll do a site survey of the venue, everything from, can we turn off that air conditioning? It's really noisy, to, oh, I have to add 80 speakers to this venue because you don't have any installed, which is a fairly typical New York thing, because most of our venues are empty. We're just 4-wall rentals here. And and then through the next couple weeks, it could be 12 weeks long, we'll be developing sound effects and going to rehearsal and working with rental shops and building up paperwork upon paperwork upon paperwork and draftings. And then we go into the theater and load in the sound system and tune the sound system. And we get to have a good time actually putting the show together on stage with all of the technical elements.
Cool. So like for yourself as a sound designer, are you in charge of all the audio portion of it technically?
Yeah. As a sound designer, I'm in charge of everything that people hear. And it's not just what the audience hears. I have to be in charge of what our performers on stage are listening to.
Right. Yeah.
I have to be in charge of what the musicians in the pit orchestra might be listening to. And then usually I also have to be in charge of providing something so that an archive video can record and forever, document what the show sounded like as well, which might be it's harder than it sounds because, we might have 60 channels of surround sound and you have to squeeze that down into just a 2-channel board recording that comes out live into, a camera in the back of the house. So
yeah, right. Makes sense. Cool. So one of the things I'm curious about is, and you kind of touched on this, like when you're talking with the director and you'll kind of go over the script. So like on the side of video games, when I'm working, usually, I'll do work with whoever the developer is, and they'll send over like a asset list or something, or they'll send over like a visual, so you can kind of see, just by looking at whatever video they send over, like, oh, you kind of know what audio you're going to need for the game, or at least for that part of the game, for that clip. But obviously, you don't have that advantage when you're doing theater work. So I'm curious to know, like, how do you go about knowing or finding the sounds that you're going to need for the play, and knowing if the sounds are the right sounds that are going to be in the play?
I mean, I think sometimes the most obvious sounds that are in the play are just written directly in the script, right? If the playwright deems that they need a car pulling up to, foreshadow an important character and, entering the world on stage, they'll write, sound of a car up off stage and a door slam or something. Right. But oftentimes the sounds that I'm the most interested in are the ones that are not explicitly written in the script. And those are the ones that we develop along with the director. And a lot of time I'm inspired by the set design, the costume design of the characters, right? And I have to then create a world of a play outside of the theater, bring it into the theater, and then also make it sure that it fits within the story that they're telling on stage. Yep.
Do you have a process for like for example, like for me, like whenever I'm working with a developer, I'll send over, show my work, or I'll send over some examples of my work. But do you have a way that you come up with, I don't know if you can say the right sound, but like a sound that the director will be happy with? Like, is there a way that you send over a sound, but how do you know how it's going to fit in the play, or is there a process for that? Or do you just have to wait till the play is like the actors are actually on the stage and you're rehearsing, or like how does that work in terms of theater?
Well, the actors are rehearsing usually in some sort of a rehearsal studio or a hall somewhere. They've been rehearsing in church basements, or they'll rehearse in, an actual replicated set on some Broadway shows that has been loaded in with a spinning turntable and everything. But all those rehearsal halls, we will usually rent a 2-channel or a 4-channel sound system. And sometimes bigger systems if they have an orchestra in there as well. And we will try out all the sound effects. But the interesting thing is just because we try out a sound effect in a rehearsal studio, the rehearsal studio sound system isn't what it sounds like in the theater. And then also we might not have all the elements there. So, the moody lighting might not be turned on, right? So maybe the sound effects kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in the rehearsal room. And so the director might kind of be like, well, this is a placeholder. So no matter what, I always have to have options, option 1 through 5. Let's try them all in the scene. And when we get to the theater, we might be rehearsing with all the technical elements for a week, but we'll have preview periods where we have a test audience basically every night, and then a rehearsal in the morning, and then a test audience at night. And so the director might hear this sound effect 5 weeks in a row and get bored of it and want to try out something else on the third week into, preview performances. And so we'll have to be prepared to swap it out and try it, and then have a discussion about what we thought about it, what they thought about it. And if the actor hears it, lots of times the actors will have an opinion as well.
Right. Okay, interesting. So this is kind of a maybe a naive question or something or whatever, but so in my mind for like theater, whenever I think theater, you'll see something happening on stage and then you'll associate a sound with it. So whether it's like, oh, you see light flashing, like it's lightning, yeah, you're gonna hear thunder, right? Makes sense. Or like you said, like maybe there's a car. I guess you probably wouldn't see it on stage, but maybe you do. You see a car, you hear a car. But basically, how is it that simple? And do you ever create more complex sounds than that? And what considerations you have to take when you do create sounds for theater, especially for those, I guess, that are maybe you don't see on stage? Like, yeah, what how do you come up with that, and what considerations you have to take to actually create those sounds to make sure that they actually sound good on the stage, or especially for the audience?
I guess my philosophy is that I have to make sure that there's this constant invisible thread between the audience and the actors on stage, right? And if that thread snaps because it gets too tight, and then they lose focus of what's happening with the characters on stage, or if it becomes too loose and they get bored and they start looking around the audience, then I'm not doing my job either. So when it comes to creating a soundscape, which besides the spot sound effects that are in the scripts that say car, door slam, rain outside, the actual more cinematic mood driving sound effects of the the ambience, that's the stuff that you really have to kind of play super subtle. And when I say super subtle, when we think of the dynamics in a movie, we think movies are fairly compressed, but when we there goes my radiator.
That's all right.
Which I have recorded and used in sound effects before. But when we think of creating the mood on stage, it has to be something that comes from the stage but doesn't distract the actors. So it has to be fairly quiet, but also has to be heard by perhaps 3,000 different people in the actual audience of the house.
Yep.
And we might just try a little 1 dB shift or a 2 dB shift, or we might put it, coming from a single tiny speaker on stage, but then we'll try to delay it into the main speakers in the house so that people know where it's coming from, but it's supported more out where they are and less on stage. So we create this kind of soundscape to suck the audience in, but if we can't suck them in too hard into the sounds, because then we're distracting from the actual storytelling on stage.
Right.
So the dialogue and the vocals are always the number one thing that we have to worry about, because if that story isn't told, then we're not doing our job. But sometimes the sound design becomes its own character, and we'll kind of leap out upon the page there, and that's when it gets kind of fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Actually, that's a great segue to the next question I wanted to ask you, which was going more into like designing actual sounds. Is there a sound that you could pick out either from like one of your latest shows you've worked on that you could kind of break apart for us and maybe tell us how you recorded it, how you designed it, and kind of go into the details of that?
Sure. Well, before the shutdown, the last big show I did was a musical called Emojiland, which is not the movie, but was a show where all the characters were emojis, and they lived within a phone, and the phone gets an update, so a whole bunch of new emojis come along. It's a little bit of a popularity contest, but one of the emojis is called Nerd Face. And he meets the older emoji called Skull Face. And Skull Face is a little depressing, a little bit evil. And Skull says, look, man, I'm a skull, but for some reason I can't die, right? So could you help me out and make me a virus, right? And so Nerd Face trying to be a best friend to his new friend, the Skull Face, makes a virus, and Skull takes the virus and smashes it on the ground, and the virus spreads throughout Emojiland, corrupting all of the, all the bits and bytes, and has to basically corrode this world and potentially risk, killing everybody in Emojiland. So, right at the end of Act 1, Skull smashes this test tube of this virus, and I have to create the smash sound and this swirling sound of the virus spreading and all of the things dying and crashing around it, and then all through Act 2 is all about how do we find the antidote to the virus. But
cool.
That sound effect.
What sources did you use for that? Like obviously you knew you'd have to create this sound. What's your go-to? Like where do you start with that?
Well, I mean, so it's a test tube smashing. So it was okay. I got to find every single breaking plate sound and glass sound, and try to find like stained glass breaking because it's got to be bigger than life. So what does an entire window sound like crashing, or and it can't be like a car window because the car windows have that special glass that tries to break into a million pieces, and we want big breaking pieces, and so you start out with that, and then you would layer all those things together and try to find like something that is sharp and piercing and kind of makes the audience jump out of their seats. And then but for all of the swirling and corroding sounds that come after it, it couldn't just be like everything dies and then silence, because all of Act 2 has to happen after that. So you have to kind of show that these pieces of the world immediately by this virus are the ones that are corroding, and then it's slowly spreading like a fog across the field kind of a thing, right? And so trying to find some cool swirling sounds from I was playing with the phaser plugins and things on my DAW, but all of the sounds had to originate from something that was something that the audience knew. So I ended up going with a lot of just regular computer telemetry sounds. So sounds.
What do you mean by that?
Just all the if you think of like an old computer, right, and all of the relays that were clicking, and or what is all the zeros and ones that go through your computer? What do those sound like? So and so you would take all those sounds of or people typing on keypads, or the notification sounds that your Nokia makes versus your iPhone makes versus your Android make, and you would take those and turn them around and flip them inside out and play them backwards, and then throw them through a pitch shifter and throw them through a reverb, and then throw that reverb through another reverb, and then throw that through a phaser. And eventually it doesn't sound anything like it originally came up with. And so you might need to put a little bit of the dry signal back in. But eventually you come up with so many sound effects, then you have to start thinking to yourself, okay, what do I not need here? And so that's the fun part, is you come up with way too much, and you layer them all together and you arrange them on your timeline. And then you have to think to yourself, okay, my audience is looking at two actors having a fight on stage. There's probably lasers happening from lighting. The projection, mapping of the set is probably going nuts with, because we had a 3D set and with 6 projectors, and so all the projectors were mapping all these cubes everywhere, and so those were probably going nuts at the same time. So the question was, am I overstimulating them, or are they going to be already overstimulated and I should just go full force? So I created a couple of versions of it, and in the end, I think I didn't do the super simplified version, and I didn't do the super everything that I have ever made for that sound effect in it, and I found kind of a middle ground. But the key part that I found at the end was that I had to have something that still showed that there was something wrong. And when the house lights came up and the projectors turned off and the lasers were done and the audience was thinking about, oh, we should get a snack at the bar because it's intermission, there still had to be a sound effect there. And so that was when I
Oh,
just kind of
interesting.
created a low drone, right? And the drone was kind of a little warbly, and it just, so it was smash, lasers, lighting, actors struggling on stage, and then blackout, and then, as the blackout happened, all of the whooshy telemetry stuff was happening, and then lights came up on stage and in the house, and the stage was empty, and then there's just a low drone happening throughout, and then the low drone originally was going to go through all of intermission, but then we decided to, because they changed the song at the top of the act 2, that the drone would only last for about 5 minutes of the 15-minute intermission.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. I really like how you use like phone sounds or like computer, like you said, computer telemetry sounds to actually create that virus, because they're living in the world of phones and stuff, and then you use that to like make it a virus. So that's pretty cool. That's nice.
Most of the show's sound effects had to sound like they were living in this, kind of 8-bit world inside the phones, right? Well, maybe not 8-bit anymore, because we're talking about iPhones, but
like very computerized sounds.
Yeah, everything had to be computer sounds. Whenever somebody had an idea, it was your quintessential like kind of Apple like ding, text notification sound. So
yeah. Cool. I don't really want to put you on the spot, but I really like how you describe that sound effect. But I was curious if there's another one that you have that you could share, maybe one that's kind of similar to this, where it's not like a actor, stamping their feet on the ground. You hear like a plank of wood or something, but like something like what you shared, where it's a bit abstract. If you don't, like, totally fine. I really enjoyed how you broke that down for us. I'd love for you if you could share another one. If you don't, that's okay though.
When I was in school, one of the very, very first kind of like really strange abstract shows that I did was in a student-run kind of cabaret, basement theater, right? And you couldn't fit more than, I think, 60 people in the audience and actors all at once, right? And then if you had more actors, you had to take out tables and they couldn't sit, and so you had less audience. But there's there's only like 10-foot ceilings or 8-foot ceilings. And so everything was very, very close and intimate. But we were doing a very, very strange play called 448 Psychosis. And I just remember like reading this script and being super young and going, is this even a script? Is this a poem? What am I doing? What am I doing? And the director just said, it's everything. Just, make it really strange. And I was like, well, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do. And, I went home and I was thinking really hard about it. And I was like, how do I, get this world? And then we had a meeting about the set, and the set was they had no money. And it was basically just like kind of like torn sheets kind of suspended from this pipe grid, and you could kind of sit in them like a hammock, but you couldn't like put 2 people in them because then they would fall down. And then
So strange.
There was water, like a tub of water, because they were going to do like a bathtub kind of like, try to get the blood off my hands sort of a scene, old school kind of Macbeth style. And I was like, okay, there's water. Okay, cool. There's water on stage. I'm going to go over there. Like, how do I make strange water sounds? And so I was like, I can do some drip sound. So I, filled up my bathtub and made, water splashy sounds and drip sounds. And then I was like, well, maybe I can make the sound of like somebody sipping water and choking. And then so I tried to record myself doing that, and then that was too strange because our lead actress on stage didn't sound like me, and so we cut that sound effect. But I remember just kind of it was inspiring in the sense that it didn't give you anything to think about directly, so you had to create it all up on your own. And I took a lot of key inspirational elements just from my collaborators that I was working with. And I remember going to a rehearsal, and they were having some stupid morbid conversation about, all of these things that they were going through in the play, and dealing with psychosis and dealing with all of the, strange things that people have done in the past who have had psychosis. And somebody mentioned, I'm gonna blank on the name, but the famous author who like stuck her head in an oven or whatever. I want to say it's Sylvia Plath or something, but feel free to cut that section out later.
It's good.
And I was like, okay, an oven sound. Like, I want the sound of an oven. And I just went home and I had like a little Zoom handheld recorder, and I just stuck it in the oven and closed the oven. And I had no clue what it sounded like in the oven. But, when I went back and I listened to it, you could hear kind of the pilot light hissing. You could hear the echo inside this, tiny little dorm room oven.
Huh, interesting.
And then that instantly became my bed for the whole show. And so little by little, I try to figure out ways that I could affect this oven bed. And so it was going to be oven bed, moving into oven bed with a little reverb, moving into a harmonic oven bed sound, because I would layer different pitch shift versions of it together and kind of created like my own sampler of it before I even knew what a sampler was at this time. And that just it just set the mood of the whole show. And then it didn't matter what drip sounds that I had on top of it, because all of a sudden that there was just an ambience, an atmosphere that just worked for this entire play. And so we could go from scene to scene to scene, and all I had to do was shift the ambient sound, and we knew we were in a different scene. And then with the lights changing, that also helped. So I just remember being super proud of this show and thinking, oh, I was totally screwed. And then all of a sudden, this sticking your recorder in an oven and closing the door for 10 minutes just made all the difference in the world.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I like how like you can use that. You use like that one thing, but you used it like to connect all the scenes as part of the play, right? That's pretty cool. So one of the things I want to ask you is, I think like so before we got on, or I had sent you some questions, and one of the things that I had asked you is like, as a sound designer, what do you think is the most important skill to learn or to master? And if I'm not mistaken, I think you said something like it's being able to, or to learn to listen, which I think is obviously very important. But I was hoping maybe you could like kind of define that for us. Like, what do you mean by listening, and how can you or whoever's listening to this show, if they're like, okay, I'm going to practice and learn to listen better, like, how do you do that?
How? Oh man. So I think listening is so important, because as a listener, you are no longer trying to, there's always a perspective of listening, right? And that perspective is either, are you listening as the sound designer, or are you listening as the director who might be listening to your sound effect for the first time? Are you listening as an audience member? Are you listening as an audience member who may have been forced to come to this show by, their kids who really wanted to see this show? Or are you coming in as an audience member who is super engaged with the show and is listening to everything, right? And I also have to listen as somebody who hasn't heard the show at all, right? And so every single time we do this performance, I have to try to reset my internal listening, memory clock, and say, okay, I need to come at, this with, tabula rasa, a fresh mind. I need to listen to the show like it's the first time I'm ever seeing this show. We've been doing this show for 6 weeks straight. I can't, and it's really hard, right? But every single but you do things like, okay, I'm going to sit in a different seat today, or I'm going to sit in the seat that the critic is going to sit in, or I'm going to go sit in the back where the cheap seats, right? And my job is to try to make all these places sound the same, but I have to make all these experiences unique and personal to the person sitting in the seat next to them.
Interesting. So are you're basically putting yourself in the shoe of somebody else and trying to hear from their perspective. So it's kind of like you're changing your mindset basically of how you're going to listen to a sound. Is that right?
Yeah. And but that's just one type of listening, listening from a new perspective of the fresh ear idea, how to come into an area with a set of fresh ears. But when it comes to also being an active listener, you have to be an active listener in a room full of collaborators. You have to know what they're bringing to the table as well. And then you have to listen to them, because if you as a sound designer don't merge your sound design with all the other design disciplines and all the other crafts on stage and different acting techniques all the different actors will bring, then you just stick out like a sore thumb, right? So you need to also listen to your collaborators and know how are you going to kind of create this like harmony between all the different elements that are being put into this pot, right?
Yeah. Cool. That makes sense. Nice. So one of the other question I want to ask you is, because most people who are going to be listening are probably just entering the field of sound design, entering, what it might be even theater production, theater work. If you were to give people advice or impart your wisdom of many years of knowledge and experience, what would you tell people to focus on in terms of skills to develop? And maybe, if you want, maybe even share like some of the mistakes or learning experiences that you've had that could help other people who are going maybe in the same or similar direction as you've gone.
I mean, there's technical skills are technical skills. The fun thing about being a sound designer is that you never stop learning new technology. I mean, people can say that, oh, Pro Tools is the standard, or, oh, but there's Logic and there's Ableton and there's Reaper, and, but like you need to know how to edit sounds, right? Maybe don't learn how to, cut and splice reel-to-reel tape these days, but, learn how to get yourself an editor, know how to do a fade in and a fade out, know how to layer a couple sound effects together, know how to put in a compressor or a limiter and reverb plugins. Those are the technical things, right? That it's just it's something that can be used whether if you work in movies or game design or theater design or rock and roll. And but when it comes to actually developing skills, the best skills you're going to learn to develop are the ones that you use with the people that you work with, right? And because I don't get hired because I'm a good sound designer at first. I get hired because people want to work with me. And so the more people who want to work with you, the more likely that then those skills that you need to learn are going to be put to the test.
Right. Makes sense. Interesting. So one of the things you said, which I thought was interesting, it's something I use all the time. Obviously, it's layering. But I was just curious if you wouldn't mind sharing, like for layering, you said, learn to layer different sounds together. Do you personally have like a way that you think about layering? Like, do you do like just frequencies, or do you think about layering just different sounds that are completely different together, or do you have a way of thinking about it, or is it just based on project to project? How do you go about doing or thinking about layering?
I think it depends on the sound effect that I'm creating, right?
Okay.
Because I think if you're trying to layer gunshots together, it's a lot different than if you're trying to layer a recording of a rainstorm, right? Mm-hmm. In the end, your goal is that you have to create a rainstorm or a gunshot or a car sound that is unique and special to the world that you are creating, right? So sometimes it's just about, I don't know what I'm doing. I need to pull as many different versions of a gunshot as possible. But then once you realize all the different ones that you have pulled can create something unique, then you have to start asking yourself, well, what kind of a gun is it? Is it a boomy gun? Is it a bad guy gun? Is it a good guy gun? Is it a gun that, in my case, needs to sound like a real gun on stage? Because if the prop gun doesn't go off, I have to be the backup sound effect, gun. So do I create a gun that is sharp and piercing and makes people kind of jump out of their seats because it sounds like a real gun? Or do I create kind of more of a fictional gun? And, the rainstorm thing, it's the same thing. Maybe I don't need the sound of thunder, but maybe I need to convey that I need to have cars coming by. So I need to have a rainstorm that sounds like a heavy rainstorm, but I also need to have car passes and wheels going through puddles. And so when you're layering, I think of it as I got to create the tone that is specific to this world, but I also have to create something that doesn't sound like just one track. It has to
Right, yeah.
fill up the whole theater. And
Yeah.
the other cool thing is that I'm not layering for necessarily a stereo sound effect. Sometimes I'm layering because I'll create a multi-channel file, and I might put the car passes upstage and some speakers that are hanging behind the actors, and I might put the light rain sounds and the surround speakers behind the audience, and I might put the heavy sounds coming from the main PA that hangs on either side of the proscenium. And so we create this kind of surround sound environment that really puts the audience into the actor's location as well.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. So it's not just thinking about, like you said, it's not just frequencies based on whatever sound you're creating, and then making sure that you're creating that sound that based on where people are sitting and for whatever thing you're creating.
Yeah, I mean, I think, time and space and localization of sound effects is a really big thing in theater, because we don't necessarily, we're not 5.1. Like,
Right,
sometimes we're like 40.7, and and sometimes the subwoofer isn't, center stage. Sometimes the subwoofer is stuck in a corner and wherever we could fit it in the theater, or, sometimes it's in the back of the theater because that's all we, So, we do really strange things and we enjoy it.
Yeah. Do you ever like layer? Well, I guess maybe you do, but do you ever layer like per monitor, like in a room? Like even if you have like 50, would you like put like one sound here, or like pick each monitor and have like a different sound each one, or would that be like too crazy?
It's not crazy at all. I mean, we use a specific software program called QLab. It's made by a real fun group of people called Figure 53, and it can do 64 channels of output, and we can and input. So we could do theoretically a multi-track file or a mono file, or we could stack a bunch of mono and stereo and multi-track files. We can play them back simultaneously. We can play them back staggered up, and we might put the one sound effect of a car coming from the left speaker, and then in that program pan it around the theater through the other 64 speakers.
Interesting. So like you'll still take whatever file and you can put it in individual speakers, or you can use them to create an environment, I guess you could say, like we were mentioning, like the car moving around, so it feels like it's going around people, right?
Yeah. One of the very first challenges that I had to do in grad school was I had to pan a marble rolling around the room. And so how do you but because it's a theater school, we had to control the start of the marble sound. We had to play the marble rolling around the room, and then at any point when the professor said, "Okay, stop the marble," we had to hit a cue, and then the marble had to stop where the marble was rolling. So a lot of, it's not like the marble cue starts left and ends right. It had to be the marble cue. It just keeps rolling around us, and then whenever we feel like it, we'll hit stop, and then it slowly stops from whatever point it is in.
Interesting.
So, theater always has that kind of live performance aspect of we don't know if the actor decides to say it's, his line's a little bit longer tonight, then the sound effect has to be able to keep up with the extra, tangent that might be happening on stage. So
right. I guess you have to like prepare for that by having, I would guess you'd have like multiple sound effects, or would you do that? Or is it just like you have a loop and then you kind of hold it on, or like based on the scene, or you have like a certain sound effect, or you have different versions of it based on what's happening, or how does that work?
Well, in the case of the marble rolling sound, you record the marble dropping on, let's say, the wood floor, the plate, or whatever you're recording it on, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to edit that into the start of a loop of the rolling sound.
Yeah.
And then you have to have a sound effect of it slowing down and stopping eventually. And so so you go into, you do the starter sound effect into the loop keeps going on, and then you kind of have to devamp the loop into the marble slowing down and stopping, right? And then then you deal with all the other surround sound panning stuff on top of that.
Interesting. Cool. Well, I think we're about at our time right now, but before we wrap up, I'd like to finish off with just some like rapid fire fun questions to ask. So if you're up for that,
Yeah, shoot.
What's that?
Do it. Let's do it.
All right. There's just a few, but all right, here we go. So what is the strangest or most interesting thing you've ever recorded that's actually made it into a show?
I was doing a production of On the Town on Broadway, and they were improvising with this giant Tyrannosaurus Rex bone puppet thing, and the Tyrannosaurus Rex had to yell at the conductor, and the conductor had to go duck behind his script or his score, and wave his baton to shoo it away. And then the Tyrannosaurus Rex had to see one of the cave girls and kind of do like a wolf whistle Tyrannosaurus Rex growl thing at her. And the design, I was an assistant on this show, and the designer kind of looked at me and was like, "Go do it." And I grabbed a recorder and went into a stairwell and stuck it up against my vocal cords and made these kind of like kind of sounds, and they made it into the show. So I would say the love-struck Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton has to be a unique experience for me. Mostly because I made it all kind of within like 10, 15 minutes. It was very last minute.
Nice. Cool. All right. What is your most used piece of gear? Apart from your computer.
Oh.
If you use that much, I don't know.
I use it all the time. Most used piece of gear. My headphones. Right. Is that lame too? You can tell me if it's lame.
That's fine. That's good. Favorite show you've ever worked on, and why, if you don't mind sharing?
I would say Hedwig and the Angry Inch on Broadway with Neil Patrick Harris, and it was my first Broadway show that I ever worked on. It was a rock and roll show, so it was loud and proud, and it was just such a great learning experience, and it was something that I felt like I could also bring my experience to the table because I came from that background, and we had a great time. Cool.
Favorite or the show you would love to work on the most, if you could, either past or present or future?
There are always new shows, right? And so I don't want to say that I wanted to go do that one show that, I've always wanted to do, but I have always wanted, I love working on new shows because the new shows is no one has any expectations of what it's already supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
But since we can't talk about any new shows yet because we don't know what those shows are yet, I will say that I've always wanted to do The Wild Party. Which is kind of it's based on a 1920s poem, and it's basically like people are dancing it up inside of an apartment, and there's a love triangle thing happening, and then and a murder happens at the end. But The Wild Party is definitely one thing that I've always wanted to do a very full, large sounding production of.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think that's all I have prepared for this. So thank you so much for giving of your time to share your knowledge, your experience with everyone. But before we let you go, do you have, where can people find you or reach out to you if anyone wants to work with you? Where can people find you?
Mostly I'm on Facebook, but the easiest way to find me is through an organization that I belong, the TSDCA, which is the Theatrical Sound Designers and Composers Association. We have a really great group of mentorship programs, and we have a student sound designer connection, and any student, no matter what their background is, it's free to join. And what we do is we match you with sound designers, and we constantly host little kind of guerrilla sound design challenges for people. And it doesn't matter what equipment you have or not have, but we have a really good way to make people network with real professional designers through that organization.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Sounds fun. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you being on.
No, thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys like that, please leave it a like. And if you guys have any requests for guests that you'd like to have on the show, leave it in the comments below. And that's it for now. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.